It's the night of July 10th, 1992. Above Dartmoor National Park, a helicopter sweeps its light across the moorland. Below, a search team moves in a line, flashlight beams cutting through the fog. They've been out here for hours, searching for 7 people. 5 of them are children. 2 are adults. The search team catches something. A shape in the dark. It's a school bus. An officer goes in hopeful, but it doesn't take long for the door to open. They're not here. For Natasha Moore, this is her worst nightmare. Just 3 days ago, she was up at 6 a.m., packing her son Chandler's bag. He was heading off on his first overnight trip with his scout group. Chandler kissed her goodbye and joined his friends. Natasha waved as the bus drove off. She felt confident her son was in safe hands. There was a bus driver and a scout leader on the trip. But now, like the other parents, she has no idea where her child is or what happened to him. You know, Dartmoor is one of those places that looks completely different depending on when you arrive. Covering over 950 square kilometers of open moorland in Devon, England, it was designated a national park in 1951, the largest open space in southern England. And on a clear day, you can see almost all of it. In the daytime, it's stunning. Granite tors breaking the horizon, trails cutting through open heathland, the kind of landscape that makes you understand immediately why people come here. But at night, it becomes disorienting in a way that's hard to prepare for, even if you've been told about it. Search and rescue teams know this better than anyone, which is why, when the sun comes up the next day, the team returns to the bus. And they finally see what the darkness had missed. Tucked into the crease of the bus seat is a folded paper. When they unfold it, it shows a map of Dartmoor, hand-drawn, and in the middle of it, an X mark. There are no labels or coordinates. For the first time, investigators have a lead. There's a mark on the map, and it makes sense to assume that the passengers went there since no belongings were left behind on the bus. That must have been their camping site. But just when investigators think the map is all they have, they reach back into the crease. There's something else. Another piece of paper. A sign-in sheet. But there's something odd about it. 7 people are missing. 5 children, 2 adults. But on the sign-in sheet, only 6 names were written down. The boys are easy to identify. Their parents had already given their names: Oliver Hatch, Simon Briggs, Danny Faulkner, Reuben Cross, and Chandler Moore. That means the one adult who signed is David Elms. But the other adult, the one who didn't sign at all, who is he? It's 2 p.m. at the Tavistock police station. Detective Blackwood sits alone in his cubicle, staring at the sign-in sheet. While the second adult remains unknown, he has the first one to work with. David Elms. He doesn't know yet if David is the bus driver or the scout leader, but the school might know, so he calls them. The principal confirms that a scout trip was arranged and a bus had been hired. But David Elms, they have never heard of him. And that's strange. Because if Elms were anyone official on that trip, whether scout leader or bus driver, the school would have had his name somewhere. That's how these things work. Someone always writes it down. Blackwood calls the local scout organization next. Same answer. No registered scout leader by that name anywhere in Devon. As the detective sips his coffee, thinking of his next move, the room door opens. A woman enters, pulling luggage behind her. She looks like she's in her early 20s. She introduces herself as Alyana Elms. She'd been in Japan when she heard the news. She took the first flight back. I know one of the people missing. David Elms. He's my dad. He's the bus driver. Alyana reveals that her dad doesn't usually drive school buses. The school didn't know him because he swapped at the last minute with the original driver, who had come down with a stomachache that day. And I think in that moment, Blackwood felt what I felt when I first heard that. Not relief, just a deeper kind of dread. Because if David Elms was the driver, then the scout leader, the adult who had led that trip, who put 5 boys on a bus and took them out to the moor, had never written his name down at all. And with no one walking through that door to claim him, no relative, no colleague, no one who knew his face, he wasn't going to be found. But Blackwood is still hopeful. Somewhere out on the moor, a search party has been working all morning, following that hand-drawn map they found in the bus. It's their only lead now, until an officer walks through the door. Detective, we went to the X mark. We didn't find them. Here's something that bothers me. Someone drew that X. And when investigators got a copy of a labeled map, they discovered that the mark was on the Crockern Tor, one of Dartmoor's iconic granite rock formations. In other words, whoever drew that X knew exactly where they were going. But when the officers mentioned they found nothing, it only got me thinking, they never made it there. Or they did, and left nothing behind. Blackwood arrives at Crockern Tor the next morning to see the place for himself, hoping for a miracle. But the officer hadn't been wrong. There are no belongings or signs of the camp. He walks the perimeter of the Tor, checks every face of the granite, and looks for another marking. But there's nothing. Frustrated, Blackwood heaves a sigh, calls it a day, and walks to his car. On the drive back to Tavistock, somewhere on that long, empty road off the moor, a realization comes to him. The map, the X, the bus, the sign-in sheet. All of it pointed to the scout leader, whose identity has been unknown for the past few days. But there was one person who might have had contact with whoever organized that trip before any of this began. The original bus driver. The man who was supposed to be on that bus. The man who got sick that morning handed the job to David Elms. Surely someone had called him to make the arrangements. And that someone might have left a name. George Dano isn't hard to find. The school has his name on file as the original assigned driver for the scout trip. He lives 20 minutes outside of Tavistock, on a quiet street that looks like every other quiet street in Devon. Blackwood knocks on his door that afternoon. He doesn't have to explain why he was there. Dano already knows. He has been following the news since the story broke, and from the moment he hears 7 people are missing on Dartmoor, he hasn't slept properly since. Because 3 weeks before the trip, someone showed up at his door. Dano shares that a man standing on his doorstep knew he was the assigned driver for the Dartmoor trip and had a proposition. He offered Dano £3,000 in cash, up front. All he had to do was step aside and pretend that he was unwell on the day of the trip, so another bus driver could take the job. Dano found it odd. Of course he did. Nobody offers a stranger that kind of money to miss a single shift. But he had debts he couldn't talk about, and £3,000 was £3,000. Before the man left, Dano asked for his name. The man smiled. John Doe. And then he walked away. After Blackwood hears everything, it immediately becomes clear to him that whoever this man is, he isn't someone who makes mistakes. He knows exactly how to stay untraceable. John Doe is a placeholder name used for unidentified individuals across every police database in the country. Run it, and you'd be drowning in entries before you even knew where to start. But if they don't have the real name, they can still have a lead. Dano sits with a sketch artist that afternoon. He describes a man in his late 40s. British, sharp jawline, hollow eyes, light in color, gray or pale blue. Dano couldn't be certain. A high forehead, thin lips, short, dirty blonde hair, graying at the temples, swept loosely to one side. The kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. Except for the smile. Dano keeps coming back to the smile. He says that it was the most unsettling feature of the man. The sketch artist draws it 3 times. Each time, Dano shakes his head. "That's not quite it," he says. "That's not quite right." Until the final sketch would be as close as they're going to get. The sketch is then circulated across town, but nobody recognizes the face. Honestly, it's not the sketch that disturbed me most about the case. It's Dano. There were 100 reasons not to take the money. The kids, the parents who trusted that trip. But he didn't even think about any of that. Because of his decision, 5 boys ended up on a bus with 2 strangers. But what's more interesting is the amount, £3,000. Nobody pays a stranger that kind of cash to miss a single shift. Not unless they need a specific person on that bus instead. Which meant David Elms was chosen. But who chose him? And why? Blackwood interviews Alyana. She is the last hope. She knows David Elms well enough to fill in the gaps. Blackwood asks the obvious question. How did David end up on that bus? Alyana explains. When her father was still looking for steady work years ago, he'd put a handwritten note on their front door. Driver available for hire. A phone number underneath. The moment he landed a regular bus driving job, it came down. He thought nothing more of it. But someone had kept the number. And that someone eventually knocked on their door with a one-time job offer to drive a school bus for a scout trip. Simple enough. And the timing was almost too convenient. That day was David's rest day. But the money was difficult to say no to. The offer was also £3,000. David laughed about it over dinner, told Alyana it felt like good fortune. He didn't describe the man in any detail she could remember. He didn't seem worried. He took the job and thought nothing of it. That's all Alyana knows. By the end of July 1992, the investigation had stalled completely. Every thread had been followed. Every lead had collapsed. The sketch matched no one. The scout leader's identity was never established. No remains were found on Dartmoor. no belongings. No explanation for the X on the map or why Crocker Tor was marked. So what happened? After spending time with this case, I have two theories. The first is that those 5 boys were kidnapped. But kidnapped for what? Not a single parent ever received a ransom call, which means this was never about money. And when a child is taken with no ransom, there's really only one other explanation. Those 5 boys were taken for organ trafficking or sex trafficking. And the planning backs it up. John Doe didn't use his real name because he knew what he was doing was criminal. He paid £3,000 to push out the original driver and another £3,000 to put his own man in the seat. That's £6,000 just to control who was behind the wheel. Elms knew what he was signing up for. He just never told his daughter the truth because it was illegal. But I have to be honest about where this theory breaks down. If those boys were trafficked, someone, somewhere, would have seen them. But not one person has come forward. Which brings me to a second theory, that this was never about taking them somewhere. That whatever happened on Dartmoor that night, those 7 people didn't survive it. But here's what stops me from going there completely. No bodies were ever found. Dartmoor was searched extensively, and while the moor is vast and unforgiving, the absence of any remains, any trace at all, is difficult to explain away. You don't lose 7 people in a national park and find nothing. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Or something else happened entirely on that moor, something that neither theory accounts for, something I don't have a name for. Yet. For 27 years, that case sat untouched. It wasn't until 2019 that investigators had a reason to look at it again. Advances in facial recognition technology meant the sketch, the one George Dano sat with a sketch artist to produce, could finally be digitized and fed into a system capable of searching every major database in the country. But no results came back. Whoever John Doe was, his face wasn't in any database. Not then, not now. David Elms was never found either. Alyana never heard from her father again. She's still waiting for an answer she may never get. And the 5 boys, Chandler Moore, Reuben Cross, Danny Faulkner, Simon Briggs, Oliver Hatch, they were 11 years old when they got on that bus, and no one has seen them since. To this day, their families are still waiting for them to come home.